Session.
Yep. Oh, well, hopefully we'll have a few more people joining us today.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome today to Moonee Valley Council's Heatwave Hacks on how to keep your home cool this summer webinar, which is being delivered to you today as part of Council's free Green Living Workshop program. Before I begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of Moonee Valley land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past and present. My name is Deanna Vidovic and I'm a Sustainability Officer with the Moonee Valley City Council. You'll be on mute for the session. However, I'd encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A or the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And our presenter today he'll stop regularly so that then he can address any questions that you may have. But we'll also have question time at the end too. If you can't stay for the whole session, we're recording it. So we'll make it available also via link that'll be sent to you after the workshop. If you don't wish to be in the recording, then just you can switch your camera off. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Archie Elston from Sapien. So Archie started Sapien while studying at uni back in 2017 with a vision to make homes more comfortable, more sustainable and less expensive to run. Archie's got a background in mechanical engineering and he's been working on major refurbishments of some of our iconic buildings in Melbourne, including the Arts Centre and the Marvel Stadium. This year, he was also the very proud recipient of the 2021 CIBSE ANZ Young Engineer of the Year Award. Archie applies his engineering background and experience in home retrofit upgrades to make people's homes more comfortable and efficient, and to educate the community on how to begin the sustainable home retrofit journey. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Archie, and over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deanna. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Feels a bit strange presenting on how to keep cool when I've got my woolen jumper on, but there's more warm days to come, I'm sure. So we'll dive right in. Oh, my preso will work. There we go. So a little bit about me. Yep, my name's Archie. I work at Sapien. Like Deanna mentioned, I started it up when I was back in university with a couple of friends, and we're all very sustainably minded and interested in energy efficiency and had a bit of an entrepreneurial bent. So, we got around together and brainstormed how we could get involved in this space. And that's how Sapien was born. And so basically the purpose of the company is to make homes more energy efficient and thermally comfortable. And so that's what we do. And our sort of primary service is draft proofing. And that was our first service as well, which because I had that kind of low barrier to entry and anyone can do it, which is great for all of you if you guys are interested in doing some DIY draft proofing. But yeah, that's a little bit about me, and we'll dive right in. So on the agenda today, we're going to chat a little bit about how weather has been changing in Victoria over time. We're also going to cover the energy efficient home retrofit journey and what that means. We'll have a little bit of a chat about indoor air quality and how we might improve that. And then at the end, we can go through some draft proofing DIY tips and tricks, where I can share with you sort of all the lessons that I've learned over the years that I've been doing this, and kind of what products that we use and what solutions are available on the market that you can easily access and apply yourself. And then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end, and I'll also be stopping along the way to address any questions as we go, but feel free to load the questions up in the chat and we'll get to them. Alrighty. So these two graphs are of Victorian climate data that I pulled from BOM. The one on the left is looking at the average temperature in summer, and the one on the right is tracking the summer maximum temperature anomaly. So how far above or below the average do those really hot days or cooler summer days get. So we can see a fairly strong trend upwards, particularly over the kind of past decades. There is a slight little downtick right at the end, which seems to be attributable to the La Nina weather event we had last summer, which we are also experiencing this summer. So will be a bit more of a wet summer, but overall there is a strong trend upward. And as our summers get hotter on average, and as our hottest days in summer get hotter too, we need to start thinking about how we're going to stay comfortable and keep our homes energy efficient. It can also lead to more severe bushfire seasons, which is something we might want to think about. But yeah, that's essentially my piece on Victorian climate data and how our summers are getting hotter and hotter as the years go on. All right, so what is the energy efficient home retrofit journey? It's sort of made up of 8 key steps, and it starts with more passive options, so improving the thermal performance of the home with things like draft proofing and insulation and glazing. Also, lighting is pretty early on, and we'll explain why that's early on in the energy efficient home retrofit journey. And then we move on to the more active stuff like our heating and cooling options, hot water, solar power, appliances and cooking. We're not going to talk about all of these, but that's a general kind of overview of the home energy retrofit journey. And the reason it's ordered like that is, and this order is not hard and fast, but it is a decent guide if you are looking to make your home energy efficient about where you want to start, because the earlier items really treat the problem at the source by minimizing our energy usage to begin with and getting the most bang for buck. And then we look at how we can reduce energy usage with our heating and cooling systems and efficient appliances. But the earlier options tend to have run-on effects for the later options, like our heating and cooling systems may be smaller if we have an efficient home, and we may require a smaller solar power system as well if we have a really efficient home. So that's an overview of the energy efficient home retrofit journey. And we'll dive into each of these items. But first, why would we begin the energy retrofit journey? So there's 3 main reasons. The biggest reason we get called out to places is people want to improve their thermal comfort. So they've got a room that's too cold in winter or too hot in summer, or their whole house, and they want to look at ways to solve that. So can definitely assist with that. The other really good reason is reducing your energy bills. Using less energy to heat or cool the home actively means that you're spending less on electricity and gas, which is always good. It's also going to reduce your carbon footprint. Again, just by using less energy, we're reducing the emissions that would otherwise be emitted in order to produce that energy. So the first item in the home energy retrofit journey is draft proofing. And it's up front and center because it's one of the lower cost items, and you get really good bang for your buck in terms of ongoing improved performance as a result of the upfront cost and effort that you put into draft proofing. Air leakage can account for up to 25% of our summer heat gain. So that can play a pretty big part in our comfort and energy use at home. There are also a few kind of happy side effects that come along with draft proofing your home, such as improved acoustic separation if you live on a busy road or near a sports field. We're also going to get less dust and bugs coming into the home. And we're also going to have a reduced air change rate during our high pollution events like a bushfire or a thunderstorm asthma event. If our air has less air infiltration, then that's going to reduce the ability of those pollutants to freely move into the home. And we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into draft proofing at the end in our DIY tips and tricks, but that's a bit of a overview to start with. Next on the list is lighting. And there's a few reasons why this is sort of so early on in the retrofit journey that I will get into. But with halogen downlights, off the bat, they use a ton of electricity. So switching to LEDs will immediately reduce the energy consumption of the home. The story doesn't end there though. So with halogen downlights, they are typically a ventilated fitting because of the heat that they generate, and also just so that you can adjust them sometimes. But this does mean that we have air leakage between our roof or ceiling space and our occupied space, which is undesirable because we just want to condition our occupied space and we don't want infiltration from other unconditioned areas. So this is a big problem with halogen downlights, and if a home's got 40 or 50 of these, that can be a significant piece of our air leakage problem. They also have clearance requirements where they must be free from any flammable materials like insulation as a result, again, of the heat generated by halogen downlights. So I've got a little screen grab from the Australian standards there on the right that shows that you need that 100 mil radius clear around the downlight that's free from any insulation. And this is actually a pretty big problem because a loss in insulation coverage has a disproportionate effect on the degradation of the performance of that insulation. So say you look at a whole ceiling and you have a 5 to 10% loss of coverage, you're actually getting more like 30 to 50% more heat gain rather than that 5 to 10%. So it has a disproportionate effect on the performance of our insulation. And so insulation coverage is something we really want to think about, and something that we can't actually really do properly when we have halogen downlights in place. So what can we actually do about that? For renters, pretty much limited with just replacing the globe, which is a great start. But if you are a homeowner, or if your landlord is prepared to have a discussion around replacing the fittings themselves, it's a good idea to replace old halogen downlights with fully sealed IC4 rated LED fittings. So the benefit here is they're a sealed fitting, so you're not having that same ventilation pathway. And because they're IC4 rated, you can insulate right up on top of them and get that full coverage. When you replace the globe, you can't actually do this because, you know, someone down the track could easily put a halogen globe back in it. So you do need to maintain that clearance. But when you've got IC4 rated fittings, you can insulate right up on top of it and get that good coverage, which is super important. So that leads us naturally on to insulation. Oh, I'm sorry, I will just point out in the previous slide, I have a snap taken from our thermal imaging camera from one of our audits in the center there. And that shows a photo of a halogen downlight and how there's an entire insulation bat that's been removed from that area of the ceiling to provide that clearance, and also a bit around kind of to the left and the bottom there. And so you can imagine the amount of insulation that's missing across a number of downlights. All right, so moving on to insulation, as we discussed, gaps in our insulation coverage have a disproportionate effect on the performance. So coverage is really important. And I've got another snap from our thermal imaging camera in the top right there, showing a home with really poor insulation coverage. That's very patchy. So the darker kind of more blue areas are cooler surface temperatures compared to the warmer, more orangey colors there. And this is a pretty common image that we get when we are auditing homes. Often there is significant loss of coverage, and that's something that definitely needs to be addressed if you're looking at making a home more energy efficient. The place we would usually start is the ceiling. It's usually the most accessible area. It also has our most significant summer heat gains and winter heat losses, up to 35%. What we typically go with is R5 bats for ceilings. So the R value really is a measure of the ability of the insulation to resist heat transfer. The higher you go, the more heat transfer it will resist. You can go higher than R5, there's nothing wrong with that, but you do start to get diminishing returns on that insulation. And R5 is kind of a good sweet spot for performance and cost. Anything above R5 and you're potentially approaching an area where that money would be better spent on other areas of the home, like looking at draft proofing, glazing, etc., or wall or underfloor insulation. For walls, the most accessible retrofit option is blow-in wall insulation, which typically involves cutting holes either in they can do weatherboard, brick, or the plaster in between all of the noggins and the studs, and blowing in wall insulation to fill in that cavity. This is, the most accessible option, without you can do it without having to rip off the weatherboards or the plaster and lay bats inside the walls. There's a neat way to tell if you have wall insulation, or at least get an idea. You can buy a thermal imaging camera and kind of look that way to see if the coverage is any good. But the other one that's a bit easier is you can just take off a power outlet cover. They're usually just held in with a couple of screws once you take the cover off, obviously taking a lot of care because there is some electrical wiring behind there. You can take your power outlet off the wall and have a little look or a feel around, again, with a lot of care, to see if there's any insulation around that surrounding area, and get an idea of are your walls actually insulated or not. For underfloor, we typically recommend R2.5 polyester rolls. You can see an image in the bottom right there of those polyester rolls that have been installed. We typically recommend this for a few reasons. It's quite robust. So the width of the rolls, they fit nice and snug between the joists and they're staple gunned in. So you get a really nice snug fit, and R.25 is a great value for underfloor. There are other options, but yeah, you do sometimes run into issues where people are trying to suspend bats with strapping or chicken wire and that kind of thing. And often it's really not as robust and you're not getting that snug fit. And sometimes it's creating a home for vermin. So vermin tend to really dislike polyester because of the way the fibers are. And so, yeah, we typically go with polyester rolls. It's just a nice, robust solution for underfloor. Any questions coming through at all, Deanna? I can't see the chat. We're all good.
Not at this stage. I've just sent a
No
little
worries.
message out to everyone, just to, yeah, feel free to use the chat function. But
All
I
good.
have a question about the blow-in insulation.
Oh, yeah, hit me.
Do you actually, for blow-in insulation, is it just as easy as like, is it like punching a hole through your wall and then just like blowing it in like from a tube? You like put it through the hole and then you blow it in. Like, is it as simple as that, or is it more complicated than that?
That's pretty much the crux of it. Yeah.
So you don't actually have to remove all the plaster, do you? Like the walls.
No. So it's cutting a number of holes, about kind of 20-cent sized pieces, in between, all of the noggins and the studs. And then it's just a hose attached to a machine.
Yeah, right.
So we get EnviroFlex to do our blow-in wall insulation. It's just a big machine that blows it in and fills in that cavity.
Yeah, right.
Seal it up.
So it doesn't, okay. Because I think I was under the impression that, you'd have to like remove huge chunks of your walls to blow this insulation in. So the size of a 20-cent piece is really pretty small.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
So easy to patch up, I think, once it's blown in.
Sorry?
So it's pretty easy to patch up the wall in the hole in the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the insulation provider would typically patch it up for you. If it was weatherboard, you might want to sand and paint it afterwards. If it's brick, patch it up with mortar.
Yeah.
But yeah, really kind of accessible solution, and it means you don't have to tear down whole chunks of wall. So yeah, that's a great way to retrofit it.
Yeah. Jan's just asking a question. Thank you, Jan. Is blow-in insulation a fire hazard, as it will be near electric cables?
For sure, yeah. It's compliant with all of the Australian standards in terms of fire retardation for insulation products. So yeah, as far as we're aware, I mean, I'm speaking specifically about EnviroWall, which EnviroFlex installs. I know that is, compliant with all the fire safety standards. So yeah, you can generally, but yeah.
Does that apply to all types of insulation, that all types of insulation have to meet those standards?
Yeah, typically, yeah. Insulation has, whether it's wall, underfloor, or in the ceiling, there are requirements for insulations and flammability and fire retardation. Not super across the real specifics of that, but there are standards that all companies are required, or all products are required to meet before they can be installed in a home.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for asking that question, Jan. It's a good one.
Thanks for that. All right, I'll charge on ahead. Windows. So once we've started looking at insulation and draft proofing and replacing the lights, the windows really are going to be our next kind of big point of weakness in our thermal envelope. So there's a few different things we can do to address windows or improve shading. So blinds and blockout curtains are an easy one for renters, and blocking out that sun during the day, depending on whether you got northwest or east facing windows. There are also different kind of quality of blinds when you're talking about thermal resistivity. So in the top left there, I've taken a photo of some cellular blinds that were installed, or honeycomb blinds. And I'm not sure if you can quite tell, but basically the cellular blinds, when they are drawn down, they actually have a kind of tessellating hexagonal shape with an air gap inside it, providing a level of kind of heat transfer resistance. And so double cellular honeycomb blinds, as far as I'm aware, are pretty much the most efficient option you can get in terms of thermal performance of an actual blind. And if you can fit them really nice and snugly within the window frame, like is shown here, they can certainly make a big difference. So definitely something to consider there. A few people ask about window films occasionally, and there are a few different kind of products on the market. The cost benefit with kind of permanent window films isn't always apparent, so it is important to do your research. Something like a low emissivity film, while it would always be helpful in a hot climate where it's, reflecting some of the sun that would otherwise be coming in to the home. In winter, the benefit becomes less apparent because you actually want that sun coming into the home in winter, and a low emissivity film would reduce that. So yeah, it's just important to do your research and make sure you're getting something that's going to be a benefit all year round. But removable films and that kind of thing is a different story. So something we've been playing with a lot is Ren Shade, which is what I've got in that bottom image there. And that's actually from my window. You can't actually quite see it. It's next to the one up behind me. But basically this is a perforated aluminium sheet that's just stuck into that window with 4 little Velcro spots, and they reflect up to 85% of the radiant heat that would otherwise be coming in, and they're fully removable. So this is a great one for homeowners and renters alike. And something that we've started playing around with a lot more recently. But yeah, something that may be worth investigating, particularly on those really hot sunny days where you can put them up and they still let a little bit of light through, so the room isn't in darkness and you can actually see through them. But yeah, definitely something that you can explore, and a good one for renters. The other options are things like secondary glazing. So this is kind of a bit more of an affordable alternative to double glazing. So it's quite expensive to kind of rip windows out and put in fully sealed double glazed units. This is a neat retrofit solution. And basically the way it works is you have an acrylic pane and a spacer, and that gets butted to your existing windows. And so it provides you with that kind of optimum still air gap that you would be getting with a fully sealed double glazed unit at a lower price, and also at reduced waste, because we're not either throwing away old glazing and that kind of things. So that is an option. And the other thing I want to talk about is window frames. If you are looking at new windows, it's important to get frames that aren't too conductive. So if you really want a kind of metal finish on your window frames, you want to find something that's thermally broken with either wood or plastic or some other really non-conductive material, because otherwise it can really degrade the performance of the window, especially if you want something a little bit more higher performing, and then you've got all of that heat transfer through the frame that can really ruin it. And I've just got an example in the kind of top center image there. This is just something I saw at a sustainability workshop that I thought was cool to share. But basically that's a sample of a triple glazed unit. And I've just highlighted in the red oval there how it's got 3 separate rubber seals. So it's a very airtight, high performance window. And you've got that aluminium finish, but it's got that wooden framing behind it. So yeah, that's probably, top of the range, and possibly overkill for our climate if, that money may be better spent elsewhere if you can just get double glazing. But I just thought it was cool, and I thought I'd share a kind of image of the kind of real premium options that are out there, really high performing. We move on to external shading. This one's really important, especially in summer. The best thing you can do is stop that radiant heat from entering the home in the first place. So external shading typically more effective than internal shading for our summer applications. A few different ways we can provide shading. One is planting deciduous plants. These are plants that are nice and leafy in the summer to provide shading, and then they shed those leaves in the winter so that we can actually get that winter sun in to warm the home up. And there's an example of that in the top right image. Plants also can assist through evapotranspiration, cooling down the sort of surrounding environment. And also if you have a lot of vegetation, it can reduce wind speeds, which can reduce heat transfer from the home through reduced convection. So there's 3 kind of principal mechanics that plants can assist in reducing heat gain in summer. For north-facing windows, we've got really good opportunity for a passive solution with fixed horizontal shading, things like eaves. So there's a picture of an example in the bottom right. where the eaves have been designed properly so that in summer, when we have that really high angle sun, the window is fully shaded and we're not letting that radiant heat get into the home. But in winter, where we've got that low angle sun, we are actually letting the sun in when it is desirable to try to capture some of that heat and warm the house up. So really simple passive solution that can be applied to north facing windows. You can also do it with slats, which is that image that's sort of in the center there. With the correct spacing and angle, you can take advantage of those low and high sun angles in winter and summer. For east and west, we're a little bit more limited because you've got the sunset and the sunrise. So we really need adjustable shading for east and west facing windows, things like blinds that will go up and down to provide that shading. All right, cooling options. So heating and cooling accounts for about 40% of household energy use. So it's a huge chunk. If we can tolerate the temperature set point in the home a little bit warmer at that kind of 24 to 27 degrees mark, then our active cooling options will use a lot less energy than if we've got it set, say, at 18, 19 degrees, where it's going to have to work pretty hard to keep the house at that temperature. Fans should typically be our first choice for mechanical cooling if they're available, because they are the lowest energy option by far. They are also, unfortunately, the least effective option, but something you can start with before it gets too hot. So these are the active cooling options we're going to discuss today. We're going to look at fans. We're going to look at air source heat pumps, or our classic reverse cycle air conditioning and the different types of that. We're also going to talk about evaporative cooling, and we'll quickly touch on ground source heat pumps and geothermal as well. So fans, again, lowest energy consumption, but least effective option for extreme heat. Fans will cool you down, but they won't actually cool down the space. So there's no point running them if you are not in the space, typically in summer. For renters, there are lots of portable fan options. The smaller they are, typically the less energy they use. You can even get cute little kind of USB powered desk fans that just draw a few watts for really localized kind of comfort cooling there. I also wanted to touch on these kind of air multipliers or bladeless fans, kind of like the Dyson alternatives. They work really well and they can be really efficient, but you can get those results at a fraction of the price. So while they look really cool and aesthetically, I think they're awesome and nothing wrong with them. Yeah, I thought I've been asked questions before and thought I'd highlight that you really are paying a premium for the aesthetic rather than the performance. So something to consider there. With ceiling fans, if you're in the market for new ceiling fans, DC ones usually use less energy than AC alternatives. It can be challenging to compare different fans that have different flow rates and that kind of thing. So an easy way to kind of compare fans like for like is to look at the energy that they draw, or the watts, per the volume of air moved, so the meters cubed per hour. So if you take the wattage of a fan and you divide it by meters cubed per hour, you're getting an indication of the efficiency of that fan. And fans with a lower watts per meter cubed per hour, bit of a mouthful, but those ones will be more efficient. So that's a way you can use that ratio of watts divided by meters cubed per hour, which should, that information should be available to you when you're shopping around to work out what's a more efficient fan. And there is a big range. So high efficiency fans can be 12 watts, whereas your lower efficiency alternatives can draw up to 100 watts for ceiling fans. Reversible ceiling fans is also a really good idea so that you can use it in winter as well. You can run them on reverse and it'll pull cool air from the room, and that will displace warm air that's accumulated at ceiling level and push that back down to the occupied level. And you would be running that on a low speed setting so that you aren't actually made less comfortable by the draft. All right, air source heat pumps. So there are a few different options here. Number one is individual split systems. So for every indoor unit, we have an outdoor unit, and this is just your classic split system air conditioning kind of mounted on the wall with a condensing unit outside. These are typically a much higher efficiency, or appreciably higher efficiency, than our central systems, as each space is individually controlled. So you can zone the house so that you're only cooling the spaces that you need to use. So yeah, definitely one of the kind of first and foremost options with air source heat pumps. There are also multi-head splits. So what this is an indoor unit multiple indoor units connected to a single outdoor unit. So this is cheaper than buying a lot of individual splits because you've got several indoor units and one outdoor unit, but it is typically less energy efficient. So something to weigh up there. It will take up less space, but yeah, and less money, but not as energy efficient. So your running costs will be a little bit higher. Next, we have our ducted system. That's what I've got here in this home, a central ducted air source heat pump. So basically this is a single indoor unit that's ducted to multiple indoor spaces. They can do a decent job, but the use of ducting does introduce a lot of additional risk and inefficiencies. So we've got increased fan energy because the fan actually has to work to push all of that air through a convoluted ducting system to reach the multiple spaces from the central unit. We also have heat losses through the ducting itself, and often insulation around flexible ductwork can get quite damaged. And we also, have a lot of surface area when you add up all of the different ducts running through the ceiling or what have you. There are also issues with possible air leakage with ducted systems. If all of the fittings and connections aren't made really airtight, then that can be a source of draft as well. So when you add all of this up, and as well as the inability to zone really effectively, these are typically less efficient when we're looking at our individual split systems. The last item on the list for air source heat pumps is our portable air conditioner, which is a kind of good option for renters. The little self-contained mobile units, they usually have a flexible duct to discharge warm air when they're in cooling mode to outside through a window connection. They are less efficient than the installed options, but can be a valuable addition to the home for renters. We also have evaporative cooling. So evaporative cooling is a really low energy option because it's basically just got a fan running and a little water pump. They typically use less energy when we're looking at our split system air conditioning or our air sourced heat pumps. However, as our home becomes more energy efficient, and if we're making it airtight and well insulated, there's a tipping point where our air sourced heat pumps overtake evaporative cooling for energy efficiency. This is because an air sourced heat pump is recycling the air in the home. So the better that home is at, keeping that conditioned air in and not taking more heat in, then our split system isn't going to have to work as hard. Whereas evaporative cooling isn't as dependent on that because we have to open up the house and bring in outside air through the evaporative cooler. So there is a point where the split system becomes more efficient, but for your classic Melbourne home, the evap cooling probably is more efficient. It does have limited effectiveness at high humidity, not generally an issue in Melbourne, although we are in another La Nina summer, so it will be a bit wetter this summer and maybe that would play a factor. It also has a constant water source, so that's something to consider from the environmental perspective. And they do have all of the attributable issues that come with a central ducted system in terms of, heat loss through the ductwork and possible air leakage. Typically, when we do audits, we find that evaporative cooling systems are very leaky, unfortunately, because they do have that direct connection to outside. And while they are installed with backdraft dampers, they are rarely 100% airtight. And so there is the downside of when you're not running the evaporative cooling, you do actually have a source of draft or air leakage for the remainder of the year, which can impact you on your heating bill in winter then. So if I was starting from scratch, I probably would be leaning towards the air sourced heat pumps for cooling, because then you can also double it up for heating. And if you've got a thermally efficient home, they're actually going to be more efficient anyway. And there are also portable options available for evap cooling. Now, ground source heat pumps or geothermal, they work a little bit differently to each other, but they both rely on the principle of a fairly constant ground temperature below a certain depth and running pipework out to those depths to capitalize on that as a heat sink or heat source, depending on the time of year. These typically have very high efficiencies and are some of the most efficient options, but they are also very priced quite highly and bring in additional complexity. So, if there's no limit on budget, go right ahead and you can get sort of the most efficient system. But yeah, if there are budgetary constraints, which typically there are, then you would probably be better off spending that upfront capital on other parts of the home, like your insulation, your draft proofing, your lighting, rather than that spending all of that premium on a ground source heat pump or geothermal system. Solar. Were there any questions coming in on the active cooling options?
Sorry,
Sorry, I don't have the chat.
There is
not.
There are some questions that I missed earlier with regards to blown insulation, so we might come back to that a bit later. And we also had some questions around the replacement of downlights, but in relation to just what you were last speaking about, Philip has asked a question about a Vornado Energy Smart DC a smart DC air circulator fan. Sorry,
Wow.
can't English today.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think he was just wondering about that.
Okay. Not sure I'm across this. This is about a specific product. Not sure exactly. Maybe we can.
Philip, if you're there, you can, there's not many of us, so you can actually unmute yourself and ask the question directly if you like.
That's all right. Maybe we'll follow up on it in the Q&A if he hasn't got his mic on now.
Yeah, sure. All right, Philip, we'll come back to you then. Sorry about that.
No stress, no stress.
And we'll come back to those other questions as well
at
the end of the session. So we're sort of, we've got about another 20 minutes or so, Archie.
Awesome. All right.
Well, a bit less than 20. Yeah, and then we'll leave the 10-minute for Q&A.
Cool. Well. All right, I'll try to fly through. Solar power. So great news with solar. The price has been steadily declining for years now, and it's much more financially viable than it used to be. Typically, we've got a payback period of about 5 years for a 5 kilowatt system in Melbourne. And the great news is if you have followed all of the steps leading up to solar, so you've done your draft proofing, replaced your lighting, well insulated the home, and looked at options for shading and glazing, then often a 5 kilowatt system can completely offset the energy use of an energy efficient home, or even produce more than it's consuming, so making it an energy positive home. If you're a renter, there are green energy power supply options. There's lots more sustainable energy getting added to the Victorian electricity grid, which is great, and something that renters can look into if they don't have solar. All right, so we'll chat a bit about indoor air quality. I won't spend too long on this because I'm keen to get to the draft proofing tips and tricks, but basically I've got here an extract from the Victorian EPA showing that less than 27 micrograms per meter cubed of PM 2.5 particles, so they're very small, is good air quality, and more than 370 is hazardous. So to put that into some context, our kind of bushfire event, when we had those really bad bushfires, we peaked at over 400 micrograms per cubic meter. So very hazardous. And there's a ton of literature, and I got a few scary stats there in the dot points about how detrimental this level of particulate matter is to our health, and why we should try to avoid being exposed to hazardous levels, or even moderate, poor, and very poor levels of PM 2.5 particles. So there's a few different sources of indoor air pollution. Bushfire events probably going to result in some of the highest levels of PM 2.5 particles, but we can also get a bit of air pollution from wood heaters like fireplaces and that kind of stuff, from surrounding neighbors, or even if you've got one yourself, from cooking processes indoors, smoking indoors, and if you're near a busy road, we can get air pollution from vehicle exhaust. So what can we do about that? Draft proofing can assist to a certain degree by limiting air infiltration, running your air conditioner to kind of cycle the air in the home through the filters. We can chat about that in a bit. If you are cooking, running the kitchen exhaust is a good idea to prevent any buildup from those cooking processes of pollutants. And then we've also got portable air cleaners, or upgrading your central air system filter, which we'll jump into now. So portable air cleaners are a great option. They can reduce the concentrations of really small particulate matter in the air by a significant degree, up to 85%. You want to get one with a HEPA filter, or a high efficiency particulate air filter, and get one that's sized appropriately for the space you intend to use it in. There's a growing body on literature about how effective these are and the health benefits that come from using these when you're in polluted areas. They can be a bit noisy, so good idea usually to check them out before you buy them to make sure that that is a noise level you're comfortable with. If you have an existing central air conditioning system, you can look at putting better filters on it and then running that system to try to filter the air in the home. Most systems start with a pretty low performing filter. You can generally kind of safely replace them with a F6 or F7 rated filter, which is just a kind of measure of how much particulate matter they can filter out. Anything above that and your air conditioning system really might start to struggle. So you usually can't put HEPA filters in an existing system because they're not designed to push air through such dense media. There is less research on upgrading central air systems as opposed to the portable ones. Logically, we would expect that having higher performing filters and running that system will assist in reducing indoor air pollutants though. Okay, and some good news for renters. So in March, some new laws came into effect. Renters can make a whole bunch of modifications without needing the rental provider's consent, like LED globes, not the fitting, just the globe. Things like low flow shower heads, putting in new blinds, you can put in the anchors without permission, and non-permanent window films. So things like the wren shade. There are also a few things that your rental provider needs to have a good reason to refuse. And this is items like to improve thermal comfort or reduce energy use. And it specifically mentions draft proofing in homes, looking at weather seals, caulking, gap filling around windows, doors, skirting, and floorboards, which is great news. So these kind of draft proofing items you can do with permission from the owner, and they would need to have a pretty good reason to decline you making these changes. This is for non-heritage homes, by the way. All right, draft proofing tips and tricks. Got a few minutes before Q&A, so I'll try to cover off a few good ones. And if you want as well, you can switch your view mode to side by side if you're not already in side by side. So if you go to the top of your screen and look at the view options, there is a side by side option, and then you'll have a kind of bar that you can drag across the screen to change how big my camera view is versus the presentation, because I've got a few products here that I'll show you on the camera and a few photos of different things here. So hopefully you can figure out the side-by-side view and get that going. But draft proofing tips and tricks, what to look for and how to fix it. So the first thing is, how do we find drafts in our home? There may be some that you're already aware of. There may be some that you're not. What we would normally do is run a blower door test. So in the top left there, I've got a picture of our blower door up and running. And what that basically does is it sucks air out of the house, depressurizing it. That air has to be made up from somewhere, so it will come back into the home through all of the worst sources of air leakage that were already present. And so what we can then do is go through the home and actually physically feel on our skin, or you can even kind of use a tissue or something to kind of try to detect air currents, but you can feel it on your skin where that air is coming in, and check around skirting, windows, doors, etc. You probably don't have a blower door at home. That's cool. But there is a neat little trick, an exercise you can do. You could even do it today to try to detect drafts and feel where your problem areas are. What you can do is switch on all the extractor fans in the house. So all of your bathroom exhaust fans, your kitchen exhaust fans, laundry exhaust, everything that's sucking air out of the house, turn it on. And then typically that will, depressurize the house enough that you will actually be able to feel where drafts are coming from, whether that's skirting, windows, and doors. It's obviously shut all of the doors and windows before you start. And if you compartmentalize the house a bit, it can make it a bit more effective. So, shut all the bedrooms while you're looking at the back half of the house so that it's not trying to pull air from the whole house. But yeah, that's a neat little trick you can do to kind of do your own audit of your home and work out where your problem areas are. So that's how you find them. And I'll go through a few kind of classic areas. So we've got doors. Doors are often quite leaky. And I'm sure people are probably aware of this as well. So a few different things we can do in the sort of top right and bottom left image there. I've got a hinged seal screwed onto a front door. And so I've actually got one here as well. But basically the way these work is they are screwed, cut to size and screwed to the bottom of the door. And when the door is open, it can move freely. But when it closes, you can see in the sort of bottom left-hand image, the hinged seal actually hits a cam, which is screwed into the frame of the door, and that closes the seal so that the rubber part is resting on the sill of the door frame to reduce airflow. So that's a good option for single hinged doors. When we're looking at around the door frame itself, there are a few different options, and I did want to highlight some materials that maybe you'd probably want to avoid. So the classic one is your kind of foam seals that you would get from Bunnings, and look, they're not bad, but they typically break down pretty quickly over time. You can see this one's already started to kind of yellow, and I haven't even taken it out of the box really. But yeah, they typically don't last very long, and they can struggle when the gap is not a constant size. If it's really small down the bottom and big up the top, you can run into issues. A little bit of a step up from that is your sort of rubber seals that you get from Bunnings, like this kind of E-seal. A bit more of a robust solution, but again, often you can have issues with closing the door or not covering the full gap if it is an uneven size. So one that we use to with a bit more success, and you can buy this stuff online, it's a sort of V-seal. And you can buy these from, there's a few different suppliers online, like in Efficiency Matrix and EcoMaster sell this. But basically, it's a plastic seal with an adhesive backing. And I cut off a bit before. And basically, you can fold it in half and stick this around the door frame. And then when the door closes, it's just resting against that and forming a nice seal. And you can actually see in the sort of center bottom image, I've got some installed around a door frame there. And so when the door closes, it's just kind of closing that V seal and forming a nice seal around the door. So that's a good option, and one that can also be used on windows and a range of other things. And yeah, it's a bit more versatile than the typical stuff you would get at Bunnings. Then you can one up it even again. So what we typically install now, and you can see it in the sort of center bottom image there, and I've also got one here, is these Draught Dodger seals. So this is probably your most kind of robust solution, but it is a lot more expensive than the sort of V seal that you can buy online. But basically this will run around the door frame, and when the door is closed, it's going to rest against this rubber seal. And yeah, these are very robust and durable and can deal with a really wide range of gaps. And yeah, you can cut them to size and stick them on. And so you can see in this image in the center bottom, you can see how that's installed around a door frame and sticks to the outside. So I also got in this image some draft proofing for evaporative cooling vents. So what we typically use is a heat saver vent cover. And what that is a magnetic collar, which sticks to the existing vent. And then in the bottom left, you can see the cover that goes over the top. That's a really nice, effective way to kind of seal up evaporative cooling vents when you are not using the evaporative cooling, and they can pop right off when you do want to use it. You can remove it pretty easily. In the top left, I've got an image that's me blocking up some permanent wall vents. So a lot of old houses have these. They're a bit of a relic sort of left over from when there were more kind of open flue gas heaters or kerosene heaters or open fireplaces where there was that risk of asphyxiation and they wanted that permanent level of ventilation to ensure the safety of the occupants. But if you don't have any open flue gas appliances or wood heaters or kerosene heaters, then these are generally safe to seal up. And we would just use a sort of multi-purpose plaster filler product. Another big one, if you have them, is old fireplaces. And I'll wrap up soon because there's potentially some questions coming in. But so what we normally do for fireplaces, and if you've got a fireplace that you don't use, it's likely to be your worst source of air leakage in the home. We used to use these sort of chimney balloons, which aren't a bad product, but they're not super durable and they can deflate a little bit over time. And we've sort of moved on to just using medium density rubber foam. You can buy it from Clark Rubber, or I think EcoMaster sells little pre-cut kits. But basically, you can cut this stuff to size a little bit bigger than the throat of your existing chimney, plug it up there, and then from a compression fit, it'll hold there and seal that up really nicely. And it's just a lot more kind of durable and robust than the balloons, and they'll stay there and not fall out. So maybe I'll just chat about maybe this next slide and then look at some questions. So you can see other really common sources of air leakage. We've got around plumbing fittings in that center top image. For that one, there's a few, what we normally do is we fill it up with some kind of gap filler rod like this, which you can just get from Bunnings, and also the trusty caulking gun with some gap filler to seal up around plumbing fittings. Also, air leakage around skirting is really common. So in that top left image, again, we get out our trusty caulking gun. I also highly recommend getting a caulking tool from Bunnings, which looks like that, which can make it a lot easier to get a really neat finish with the caulking without having to spend all day trying to do it with your fingers or a damp cloth or something. You can run a line of caulking and then run the caulking tool behind it and get a really nice, neat finish. In the kind of bottom image we've got there is gaps around a ducted heating vent. So this one's really common for people that have ducted heating. If you take the grill out, usually you will see gaps all around the duct and the floorboards. Often they're a lot worse than this even. And typically these are just going straight to the underfloor cavity. And oftentimes you can just see the dirt. Pretty easy one to solve, thankfully. Again, we get at our trusty caulking gun and fill up around the perimeter there. And if it's really big, you can get the gap filler rod out again as well and use that to help seal it up. So maybe, I am conscious of time, maybe I'll stop and we'll see where the questions are at. But there's a few of the key kind of draft proofing tips and tricks.
Sure thing. Okay. So we'll go back to one of the earlier questions that we got from Philip about blow-in insulation. And he's asking if it can be put inside the walls from the top of the walls inside the roof cavity.
Yeah, I don't see why not. The only issue may be, oh, sorry, you mean like different to blow-in? You can certainly feed.
Oh no, this is regarding blow-in insulation.
Regarding blow-in, yeah. Yeah, you possibly could. I think if you could take some of the roofing off so you could do it from outside, it might be easiest because you need to somehow get the hose from the blow-in machine into the roof cavity to then feed into the wall cavity. But yeah, otherwise no reason that you couldn't do that. The only issue might be that because of all of the noggins, which are your horizontal pieces going down the wall, that your insulation may not feed all the way down the full height of the wall. And so while that would prevent the need to cut holes in the wall for that top layer, you may need additional holes between the noggins to get coverage in the kind of mid and bottom sections of the wall. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Aki. So Maria's got a question and she's asking with regards to the replacement of downlights, can any electrician replace them with the sealed IC4 rated fittings?
Usually, yeah. There's not any qualified electrician, if they have that skill set, should be perfectly qualified to do that and provide a certificate of electrical safety at the end, which I would recommend asking for.
Okay. Now, just about that Vornado Energy Smart DC air circulator fan.
Yeah,
Philip's
awesome.
put a link in the chat. So Philip, if you're still there, I have clicked on the link, but the image is not popping up, so can't really see what it looks like, unfortunately. Philip, are you still there? looks like you're still there.
Yeah, okay.
But if anyone has,
Screen sharing.
we can come back to Philip in a minute if we need to, if there's another link that is working. Or is that working for you? Are you trying it now, Archie?
I am trying, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a
I
white
just get a
square.
blank screen, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do as well.
Do we have any other questions? Because we've got 5 minutes.
Well, maybe I'll jump into a couple more draft roofing items while people think of
sure.
questions, and just
Go ahead.
interrupt me maybe if something
Yep,
good
yep,
comes
yep.
in.
Will do.
But yeah, another really good one to think about is your extractor fans in the house. So your kind of bathroom exhaust fan and that kind of thing. If you think about a normal extractor fan when it isn't running, you've basically got a gaping hole into the ceiling space that typically just discharge into the roof cavity for houses. And this is undesired air leakage that you want to try and avoid. So there are a couple of options. One is you can get one of these draft stopper backdraft dampers, and so this one's a bit warped because I get overheated in the sun, but I use it as my example one. But basically these go inside the ceiling over the existing fan. When the fan is running, the flaps are lifted and the air can pass through, and then when the fan's not running, the weight of the flaps closes them, and so you drastically reduce the amount of air leakage coming through. They're a good option, and I think they're $35, $40 from Bunnings. The other option that we typically do is just replacing the fan. And it's generally not that much more expensive than buying one of the backdraft dampers, but you can replace the fan with something like this that we get from Bunnings. And they actually come with a built-in backdraft damper. And typically you can just, with the fan off, unscrew your existing bathroom fan and unplug it. They're usually just plugged in with a cord. And then you can plug this one in and install this one. And they've got instructions on how to install it. Often installing these is, potentially even easier than actually trying to crawl inside the ceiling and put a backdraft damper over an existing one. Definitely recommend that. They are a lot noisier than regular fans. Not exactly sure why, but it doesn't bother me, but some people definitely have raised it. But yeah, that's also a really good option for existing fans that would otherwise have a ton of air leakage into the roof space. I can see a question.
Yep, there is a question from Nellie. So Nellie's saying she's got a cavity sliding door, which is pretty drafty. So any solutions for that?
Yeah, this is a really common one as well. Often when we're doing audits, we can feel a ton of air coming in behind cavity sliding doors. So what we usually do with this is take the cavity sliding door off, and then come back to our trusty medium density rubber foam. Now, typically after you've taken the cavity sliding door off, and it's probably easier maybe to look up a YouTube tutorial than me trying to explain it without a cavity door in front of me. But basically you have to take off the strip of wood up the top, loosen the bolts on the cavity sliding door, take off the guide on the bottom, and then pull the door out. And then if you look down the back of the cavity sliding door with a headlamp, you can see usually at the back of the door, there's gaps on either side of that kind of back wooden panel, sometimes at the top as well, and sometimes at the bottom. And what we would normally do is we'd cut off strips of this medium density rubber foam, and we would feed it down the back with a kind of, if you get a stick, a piece of timber with some screws on the end, you can kind of skewer a bit of this medium density foam and feed it down the back and plug those gaps up. Definitely fiddly work. Put aside, a few hours to try to get it done properly, and it can be pretty frustrating, to be frank. But yeah, definitely can vastly reduce the amount of air leakage that would be coming in around that cavity sliding door. There are also products or kind of kits available. I think EcoMaster does a cavity sliding door kit, but the way that they work is they will seal. If the cavity sliding door is between two rooms, it will seal one room from the other room when that door is closed. So it kind of only seals it on one side. Not sure if I'm making sense, but that is another option. But to actually stop air coming in from the wall cavity, you really need to get the door off and plug it up with this kind of stuff. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Aki. And So Philip's also asking whether whirlybirds on a roof do anything.
Yeah, so typically these are just to ventilate the roof. So roofs, have a lot of parts of the house discharging into the cavity from your bathroom, your shower, kitchen exhaust sometimes. And so if that roof space is not properly ventilated, then, moisture and pollutants can build up in there and cause a whole range of issues. So my understanding with the whirlybirds is just to keep that roof cavity ventilated.
Okay. Oh, Philip's managed to find an image of that
Oh, great.
air circulator thing. There, yep, that's the one. I don't
Oh,
know whether
cool.
you can speak specifically to certain
No, I probably
brands or
can't. It does look very schmick. But yeah, I'm not familiar with this specific product. But yeah, definitely. My advice would be to have a look at the technical data and compare it to other fans of equivalent flow rate, so equivalent meters cubed per hour. But yeah, good little kind of desk fans like this can be very effective and a low energy option because they're so small. But yeah, can't speak to this specific product.
okay. All right. So I think no, there are no more questions. I hope I haven't missed any. Let me just double check, just in the last minute or two. Okay, I think we have covered all the questions. Is there any final words from you, Archie, before we wrap up?
Just yeah, I reckon it's always a fun exercise to do your own little home audit, getting all the fans going and having a look around, and trying to find sources of air leakage that way. There's lots of really good resources for people who are interested in making their home a lot more energy efficient. I mean, you can look at this presentation, but there's also some good books and stuff that I've used, like the Energy Freedom Home. Don't know if
Where
that's
do you
shown.
get that from, Archie?
There's a few different distributors, but if you just Google the Energy Freedom Home, I think there are a number of bookshops and sellers. The other really good resource, which is not so much for retrofitting, but has some pearls of wisdom and a lot for new builds, is Your Home. You can buy the book. This is actually a government product. And online, it's completely free. So if you Google Your Home, all of the chapters and all the content is free, and it's a gold mine. So I definitely recommend checking out Your Home if you're interested. I wanted the hard copy because it's a really cool book. But that's another great resource.
When was it published?
When?
Yeah.
They keep republishing it for latest editions. This is the
great.
5th edition. So this is 2016. But there may be a 6th edition out now or a 7th even.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yep.
But they keep republishing it and updating it, which is good.
Terrific.
So yeah, definitely check that out, and feel free to get in touch with me as well. All of the stuff we've talked about, or a lot of it, is the kind of stuff that we do. And if you have any questions, there's my contact details on the screen, and there's a bunch of links as well there when that gets shared out, with a bunch of useful resources and guides and a whole range of different, more detail on a lot of the topics that we've already covered.
Fantastic. All right, Archie. Well, we'll leave it there for today. We're just gone 3 minutes over. So brilliant presentation. With some really useful tips and tricks to keep your house cool over the coming summer. Thanks for joining us today and for all your questions. Jan says thanks a lot. So there you go.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I will also be sending out this the link to this recording. So for anyone who's missed it, will get the chance to rewatch it at their leisure. Again, thanks, Archie. Always a pleasure. And maybe we'll see you next year for how to keep your house warm in winter.
Yeah, that's it. I'd be keen. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. And I hope that, it was a valuable session and you guys got something out of it.
All right, great. Thanks, Archie. Thanks to all of you who've joined us today. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Diana.
Bye. Thank